It's been about 40 chapters since we've really last seen Megumi. He's apparently the deuteragonist, but hasn't amounted to much during the current arc. We're now in Shinjuku in the climax of Jujutsu Kaisen's story. Fans expect more from Megumi, and it's an understandable expectation. He's the first character that we're introduced to in Jujutsu Kaisen. Before Gojo, Sukuna, and even Yuji, we saw Megumi. He's the son of Toji Zenin and the first student of Satoru Gojo. Both are two of the strongest fighters in history. Gojo wanted Megumi to lead the modern age of sorcerers, the next generation that's supposed to be stronger than Gojo himself. Megumi's the only sorcerer who's taken the teachings directly from Gojo and Sukuna themselves, the two strongest in history. He's got even more potential than Yuji Itadori, who's currently slamming Sukuna back and forth with black flashes. But that all changed with chapter 212, probably the most story-breaking chapter in Jujutsu Kaisen. Megumi's now nothing more than a vessel for the strongest sorcerer to ever live, Ryomen Sukuna. Imprisoned in his own body, Megumi's forced to watch his master cut down by his own hands. His allies are constantly being slaughtered in front of him, just like his sister Tsumaki. Megumi's watching his own personal nightmare with never-ending suffering. When Yuji tried to save Megumi, he couldn't even bring himself to stand up. His soul was shattered a long time ago, and he probably doesn't even see a point in being liberated. His future promise as a sorcerer seems to have been shattered a long time ago. Nobody knows if Megumi can even really be saved. However, that's not really the topic of today's video. Everyone knows Megumi's got insane potential and just how wasted it can seem. But if Megumi manages to escape his own personal hell, there's an unparalleled threat that might be the biggest twist to the story so far. It's slowly becoming more reasonable to assume that if Megumi does survive, he might become the next Sukuna of the modern age. If Megumi does make it out alive, what's next might surprise everyone, and I don't expect anything less from Gege Akutami. Today, I'll explain why if Megumi survives, we might be looking at the next Ryomen Sukuna. You're watching a World of Warships sponsored video. It's the greatest tactical naval shooter of all time. Download World of Warships. It's the first link in the description. Use the promo code SIXTHWAVEAZURLANE and you'll get 1.5 million credits, 600 doubloons, 7 days of premium account access, 1 Azur Lane container, Fuso Azur Lane Commander, and the Japanese destroyer ship Fubuki. You'll have the most fun out at sea thanks to World of Warships. It's free to play, so start playing right now. You're not going to want to miss out on what's happening, especially with the Azur Lane returning to World of Warships for its 6th wave. It means new premium ships, commanders, and skin upgrades for your naval battles. We got brand new commanders like Shimakaze and Hornet, each with full voice packs. I'm the most hyped for the Azur Lane themed ships, but both the commanders and the new ships bring new life to the game's aesthetic. I'll definitely be using these out at sea. World of Warships also has the most breathtaking graphics that I've ever seen from any naval-based shooter. It's a big reason behind why World of Warships is so amazing. New weather effects create that vivid backdrop that's just perfect for these brand new Azur Lane ships. There's ship classes like destroyers and aircraft carriers with the Azur Lane themes, and it really adds tons of variety and style along with further depth to the gameplay. World of Warships having both team play and solo mode means that you can play with a division of your friends or sail solo with the Azur Lane ships. I recommend playing with your friends so that way you have that chemistry to really make the best strategies, but playing solo also comes with that thrill of going out on your own, so it's really up to you. World of Warships with all that new Azur Lane content can be played on both console too, so don't miss out. Download World of Warships from the link in the description, and remember to use the promo code to claim all these freebies. If you read back to after the Goodwill event, Megumi decided to ask Gojo for some extra training since he felt pressured by Yuji's rapid growth against Hanami and Todo. According to Gojo, it's the mental aspect that holds Megumi back from reaching Yuji's level, but that's not entirely the case. There's another reason to explain why Yuji was developing so fast. Only recently, it was revealed that Yuji's development skyrocketed directly because he was a vessel for Sukuna. It's a similar concept to muscle memory. Yuji's body remembers what it's like to control special grade power. Kusakabe flat out says that that's the reason why Yuji's been developing so rapidly, and honestly, it makes perfect sense. When people engage in sports, they repeat the same motions until their bodies remember the movements. Sukuna possessed his body and even used jujutsu. Kusakabe makes it sound obvious, but what's really happening is that Yuji's body is remembering how to perform special grade curse techniques. Now recently, Yuji's been finally picking them up, and he's already using his curse technique shrine. Keep in mind, Sukuna had only taken complete control of Yuji's body for at best a couple hours. Kusakabe compared this concept to muscle memory, so let's elaborate on that a little bit more. After some time, your body will remember how to perform these tasks almost unconsciously. We've seen this concept in full effect with Yuji using shrine, but since the beginning, he's been developing because of his body having special grade experience. Sukuna never really took complete control of Yuji's body that often. Because it's all about repeating actions to create that muscle memory, it's a very important detail. The more often Sukuna would do these actions in either of their bodies, the faster they would develop. He's taken complete control of Megumi's body for an entire month, while Sukuna only had control of Yuji's body for at best a few hours. Not to mention, Sukuna's also fought much harder battles inside of Megumi's body. Not only is Megumi actively memorizing what it's like to control special grade power, but also use that power against other special grade grades like Gojo and Yuta. It doesn't just stop there. Sukuna's fought just about everyone who'd be considered the top 5 strongest around. It starts with Maki and Yuji in chapter 215, then he goes on to face Ryu and Yorozu, and that's all before he's even consumed about 20 fingers worth of his original power, and then went on to fight Satoru Gojo. Megumi's body isn't just remembering what it's like to use Cleave and Dismantle like Itadori, but the 10 shadows too. Sukuna has been actively developing Megumi's curse technique for him, making it even stronger than it was before. It's no secret that the 10 shadows is partially what makes Megumi a potential special grade. Gojo implied that it could even surpass his Limitless one day. Sukuna not only came farther than Megumi had, but even surpassed every 10 shadows user in history. Maharaga, the ace of the 10 shadows curse technique, and the strongest Shikigami and weapon in Zenin clan history, was nearly completely uncontrollable. No other 10 shadows user in history, even back in the Golden Age, ever tamed Maharaga, including the sorcerer that defeated the previous 6 Eyes user in the old Gojo clan head. Sukuna not only tamed Maharaga, but also used his power strategically in ways that we've never seen before. Megumi's body's not only memorizing what it's like to manipulate cursed energy on the level of a special grade, but also 2 entirely different curse techniques. During Shibuya, when Sukuna swapped back with Yuji, we saw that he was forced to watch everything firsthand that happened to the city during the Malevolent Shrine. Sukuna realized that if he wanted to take complete control of Megumi's body, he would need to shatter his soul. Megumi was likely watching everything that happened so far just like Yuji. He's not only gonna have that seemingly unconscious muscle memory from controlling special grade power, but he'll also have that first-hand experience of what it's like watching somebody take the 10 shadows to the next level. It took landing another Black Flash for Yuji to fully manifest and awaken Sukuna's curse technique shrine, and it also took months to fully develop. But again, compared to Megumi's current situation, Sukuna had barely even taken control of Itadori's body. When comparing experience between each body, there's clearly a strong difference. Sukuna not only used the 10 shadows, which he obviously never had done in his previous vessel, but he also landed Black Flashes. Landing even just one Black Flash greatly improves a sorcerer's ability to control and manipulate cursed energy, and therefore the rest of their jutsu. Those who manage to pull off a Black Flash have their own heightened understanding of cursed energy. They can't even be compared to those who have never landed a Black Flash before. Gege Akutami mentioned before that Megumi hadn't previously been suited for landing a Black Flash, and it's why he decided to give him a domain expansion instead. But since Sukuna landed multiple Black Flashes in his own body, Megumi might have some form of experience and that understanding that everyone else receives when they land a Black Flash. He wasn't suited to land a Black Flash before, but now he's gonna have the memories of how a body feels after landing the sparks of black. One lacking part of Megumi's arsenal has always been linked to his domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden. He was never able to fully wrap his head around completing the domain expansion with an actual barrier. Chimera Shadow Garden has always been incomplete. Its true potential was never really manifested. Megumi was still missing the barrier. It's still functional and definitely the ace in his arsenal, but it could be so much more. Domain expansions in the modern age come with their own lethal sure hit effect, unlike Chimera Shadow Garden. It takes a real barrier that's manifested properly if you want to create your own sure hit effect, since curse techniques are imbued into the domain's barrier. Megumi tried to make up for this by using an existing environment as a synthetic man-made shell for his makeshift barrier. It's just a downright terrible substitute. This guy's using caves and gymnasiums as the arena for what's supposed to be his trump card. Even against Reggie, it's a risky plan. It means that Megumi not only can't just expand Chimera Shadow Garden while he's standing outside, but that the outer shell itself can sometimes be as strong as a gymnasium. Outer shells for the most part in domain expansions are generally pretty weak, but being as durable as your average building is just a much bigger red flag. Megumi's domain only exists to expand the 10 shadows and boosting it to about 120% of its overall potential. Besides expanding his technique's interpretation, which don't get me wrong is pretty useful, you really don't get much else besides trapping opponents inside Chimera Shadow Garden. Luckily for Megumi, he's now also seen firsthand exactly how to perform domain expansion from the perspective of the best domain user of all time. Sukuna's used Malevolent Shrine about 4 times since taking control of his new vessel. Megumi's seen more than once what it's like to perform an open barrier domain expansion. It was implied pretty recently that an open barrier expansion like Kenjaku's and Sukuna's are much harder to pull off than a closed barrier expansion, which is the type of domain that Megumi was trying to replicate in the first place. In chapter 258, when Sukuna manifested Malevolent Shrine, our narrator comments about how activating this Malevolent Shrine is just as difficult as it's always been, before mentioning that this is also an open barrier expansion just like in Shibuya. Megumi's not only seen exactly how to pull off just any type of complete domain expansion, but the hardest to master. Not even Gojo could really figure out how it's done. Normally, since Gojo's got the 6 eyes, most techniques he's tried to attempt work successfully on the first try. But if Gojo doesn't exactly know how to attempt to use the technique in the first place, then of course he can't pull it off. Hollow Purple or Reversal Red are pretty good examples. Gojo didn't understand what Shoko meant when she tried teaching him about positive energy. It sounded like gibberish. However, when Gojo finally understood, he not only performed Reversal Red on his first attempt, but also Hollow Purple. Satoru Gojo probably didn't use an open barrier expansion because he couldn't figure out how to attempt it in the first place, unlike Sukuna, who Megumi's getting to watch with his own eyes. Megumi has been trying to find a substitute for not having a proper outer shell since he first expanded his domain, and Sukuna just showed him exactly how it's done. It's like Megumi's been watching a tutorial on how to become special grade from history's strongest sorcerer. Maharaga, who could never be tamed until now, is now completely under Sukuna's control, which could also potentially include Megumi since that's his body. Other binding vow agreements that fall under Sukuna's control aren't actually labeled under Sukuna himself. When Kenjaku transferred control of the merger to Sukuna, he was forced to give control to Megumi instead, since that's his vessel. We might possibly see something similar with Maharaga, but we'll just have to wait and see. Chimera Beast Agito is a combination of a bunch of Shikigami in the 10 Shadows arsenal. It's a concept that's going to change and add tons of potential variety into Megumi's arsenal. Obviously, if Megumi returns, he'll be insanely strong. Both the muscle memory that comes with becoming a vessel for a special grade and the first-hand experience with using some of that power can rapidly increase Megumi's rate of growth, just like Yuji. But why would Megumi return to become the next Sukuna instead of the next Satoru Gojo? Think about Megumi's current state, both physically and mentally. He's been broken down completely. He doesn't even want to be freed. Inside Yuta's domain expansion, Itadori manages to make contact with Megumi inside of Sukuna. His body naturally learned how to perceive the contours of the soul. It's what made Yuji Itadori Mahito's mortal enemy. He's the only one able to damage his soul. According to Yuki's notes, souls may mix to some degree, but they usually don't become one. Megumi and Sukuna's souls aren't combined. There's already a space in between them. Since Yuji can already damage Sukuna's soul, every punch that he lands will continue to further separate Megumi and Sukuna. Yuji can sense it, and he's aiming for the barrier between each soul. Every attack continues to forcefully take back control from Megumi, so that way he can wake back up again. Combined with Angel's Curse technique frying Sukuna, it was just enough for Yuji to make contact with Megumi, but Megumi's soul is still submerged. It's just as deep as it was before. Sukuna had sensed potential from Megumi's 10 Shadows Curse technique, but also his capacity to suppress him as a vessel. Since Sukuna wasn't looking for a new cage like Itadori, he realized that he would need to break Megumi's soul by breaking his spirit. Realizing his sister Tsumiki was actually a Heian era sorcerer named Yorozu, it was already enough to have more control of Megumi's body than he'd ever have in Yuji's. But it definitely wasn't perfect. Sukuna still had problems when it came to controlling his new vessel. To make sure that Megumi's soul would be shattered for good, Sukuna fought Yorozu, who's actually just Megumi's sister. Sukuna makes sure to unalive Yorozu by using Megumi's own curse technique, the 10 Shadows, so Sukuna can make sure to show Megumi that he caused the death of his own sister. That's the moment that Sukuna gained full control over Megumi's body. It's only gotten worse since. Satoru Gojo was slaughtered before Megumi's eyes, Yuta was completely sliced in half, and the rest of his allies, they're still fighting an uphill battle that Megumi's forced to watch in silence. Even after getting his soul shattered, he continued to get fried by Infinite Void, while his body continued to get beaten up by the strongest sorcerers at Jujutsu High. It's pretty obvious that Megumi doesn't have much to live for at all. Megumi is still stuck at the bottom, where Sukuna literally sunk down his soul. He's got his face stuck to the ground while telling Yuji that's enough. He doesn't even want to be saved. If Megumi is saved, this is going to be forced liberation. He'll be getting freed against his own will, and Megumi's going to be forced to exist in a world that he probably doesn't even want to be alive to see. But obviously, that's not going to turn Megumi, especially against his allies. But undoubtedly, this means that Megumi, at least psychologically, is pretty messed up, and his perception of life itself is corrupted. It's not crazy to say that mentally, Megumi might never be in the right state of mind ever again. Everything in the last 40 chapters is some of the most traumatic experiences anybody in Jujutsu Kaisen has ever been through, but especially survives. There's one person that I can see Megumi's anger being forced against, an ally to Megumi that could be a scapegoat for everything that's gone so wrong in his life in the last month. Well, obviously this isn't actually his fault, it's very easy to blame Yuji Itadori for Megumi's position. Sukuna was able to swap vessels in the first place because Yuji had made a deal that in reality was incredibly irresponsible. When Yuji had been temporarily unalived, Sukuna had given him an opportunity to resurrect him back from death. Sukuna offers his reverse curse technique to repair his heart, but in return, he'd allowed Sukuna to take control of his body for just a minute. If Sukuna says in chain at any point, he loses control for just 60 seconds. At first, Yuji's pretty hesitant, but Sukuna promises that he won't hurt anyone during that time. Another promise that Yuji makes is conditioned upon him forgetting this agreement. Itadori doesn't remember this interaction. Overall, this was a pretty stupid decision, especially considering that Yuji forgot this agreement, so it's not like any preparations could really be planned. He might even be a little bit selfish, honestly, allowing the King of Curses 1 full minute of control for something obviously negative to happen, all because Yuji wanted to live. Itadori says himself that this is fishy. Sukuna's evil, and that's the truth. Megumi, after learning about this agreement, might blame Yuji for Sukuna's reincarnation. It's Yuji's fault for making an irresponsible agreement that trapped Megumi inside of his own body. It was Megumi's request to Gojo that made sure that he survived. In return, Megumi was the one who paid the price for that decision. Megumi's sister Tsumaki did too. With Megumi being mentally broken and probably emotionally unstable, it's a very easy angle for a tormented mind like Megumi to force all of his anger towards Yuji Itadori. He'll harbor hate for the person who made the decision that costed so many people close to Megumi pain and suffering, while he was also the one to save Yuji's life in the first place. That's why Megumi might potentially become the next Ryomen Sukuna. Don't forget to use the promo code SIXTHWAVEAZURLANE for all those crazy rewards when downloading World of Warships.